Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to take that as my cue to get started. I'm sure that other folks will join us, and some folks may need to drop off before we finish, but I'm Alan Kalish. I'm an assistant vice provost in undergraduate education at The Ohio State University, and I'll be moderating with colleagues from my university and from Stanford and so the Methodist, and I will let each of them introduce themselves as they begin. But we're really, in this session, want to talk about how we have tried to get the significant civic learning happening at large research universities, especially given the difficulty of doing anything universal at a large university and getting the buy-in from faculty across the variety of research areas that we have. Today, you'll get to hear 3 different examples of how folks have made that happen recently or are in the process of making that happen. And you'll have the chance to chat with them, ask questions, talk about how this may be adaptable in your setting as well. And we'll begin with Dustin from SMU.
Well, hello from Dallas, everybody. My name is Dustin Grabsch. I use he, him, and his pronouns, and I serve SMU as the Assistant Provost for Undergraduate Education and Academic Success. So I get to work with our general education and our faculty that help us design that. And I'm here today to talk about one of our graduation requirements called Civics and Individual Ethics. We refer to it as CIE. And it's actually a proficiency and experience. And so one of the ways we approach this work together is we have our general education requirements, which are those federally mandated hours and times, but really contribute to this idea of a liberal education. And our faculty were deeply committed to the principles of civic learning and a liberal arts education. And we developed graduation requirements, which are able to be fulfilled outside of course requirements. And so essentially students are able to complete these through courses that are tagged, traditionally like how we go about tagging courses for different general education requirements. They might also do it through recognized approved activities, which are programs, clubs, and organizations that we know regularly meet the student learning outcomes related to civics and individual ethics. Or they can propose their own adventure through an individual pathway experience. And we have around 7 of these requirements that we call proficiencies and experiences. And the one I'll be talking about today is civics and individual ethics. And really our intention with the CIE proficiency and experience is that we hope students really demonstrate this ethical reasoning around civics and individual life and society is really the intended learning outcome of whether they do the course through an organization or club or in their individual pathway. I'll be dropping in the chat just now a link if you're interested in exploring that CIE area. And then I also linked to our rubric, which is how we assess this student learning outcome. But essentially, I wanted to highlight a few of those as kind of the ways that we've embedded it. So one of the really concerns, as Alan mentioned when he started the talk, is the universal nature of this requirement. And SMU is embarking on our R1 aspirations right now, currently. And one of the things that when we were developing our new common curriculum, which we adopted in 2020, which is our new general education framework, we were wary about only adding things that required courses because we wanted to ensure we weren't delaying graduation, because I know a lot of us are focused on student success, 4-year graduation, et cetera. And by creating these proficiencies and experience areas of our graduation requirement, we were able to commit ourselves to that liberal arts education or those tenets of it, but not necessarily having to do it through course fulfillment. And that was a unique way that we were able to receive faculty buy-in and campus buy-in into this larger initiative. It also really allows us to pull in partners from student affairs as well as academic affairs. And I'd be happy to talk more about that as we continue our discussion.
Thank you. As I delay while struggling to unmute, and I did repost your link, but several more people have come in since then, so you may want to redo that again. And also, I will invite everybody if you have questions as you're hearing these presentations, please do drop those in the chat so that you don't forget them, and we can curate those and bring those back up as we finish. And then when we're in the open Q&A, feel free to either use the chat or raising your hands for that. And now Dan Edelstein from Stanford.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Great to be here with my colleague Dusty Schroeder, who's zooming in from a conference. So we at Stanford have again revised and reassembled our first year requirement. The current iteration, no one's counting, but I think we're somewhere around 9 or 10. But this one is quite different than anything we've done before. And maybe I'll say a few things about the overall requirement, then I'll let Dusty speak to the citizenship part of the college program. So it stands for Civic, Liberal, and Global Education, and it's designed as a 3-quarter sequence. The current rule is that students have to take 2 out of 3, but the goal is that ultimately they would take all 3. And what's really new about this is it's new in a way it's actually kind of old, in that we managed to convince our colleagues that there was a lot of value in students having a shared intellectual experience in the first year. And the way we go about that is in the fall and in the winter, students take a class which has the same syllabus across all 78 sections. So every student is in a small section of just 14 other students with one instructor. And so their experience of the class is as a small discussion seminar, and that these classes really are focused on discussion and conversation. But at the same time, their roommates, other frosh, friends in other classes are taking a version of this class that's with a different instructor usually, but they're reading the same books, they're doing assignments at the same time, and therefore they are actually talking about these topics outside of class, and that's really one of the goals. So the 3 foci, as I mentioned, in the fall quarter, we start by really explaining to them what liberal education is, which we kind of take for granted. It's like, yeah, you have all these requirements, these distribution requirements, writing, language. We never really tell students why we do it that way. Why aren't we England or Germany? We have a different model of education. There's a philosophy behind that. It's a very interesting, you can disagree with it, but it's worth considering. It goes all the way back to antiquity. So we talk about that in that class, and something we were struck talking before this with Alan, that there's a very similar approach that they're using at Indiana. And then in the winter quarter, the focus is on citizenship. And I'll let Dusty talk about that in a minute. And then in the spring, it's on global perspective. So the idea is it's an arc from the self to society to the world. But Dusty, maybe you can say a few words about the middle class, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Dusty Schroeder. I'm an associate professor in geophysics and electrical engineering at Stanford. And Dan was kind enough to welcome me on board when we were creating the course. So I think it was like 22 people. I think it was like 20 political philosophers and political scientists and me and a musician. And one of the things that was great about that, the course touches on being a citizen in a democratic society, and starting from just challenges of disagreeing with people and expressing opinions in a way that aren't just interpersonal attack, challenges associated when people want different things, and then moving through specific contexts and challenges, challenges of multiculturalism, challenges of technology and its impact on society, challenges associated with speech. And each unit was developed by a professor who was a specialist or particularly passionate about that topic. And in the early drafts, we had many more versions of each little sort of lovingly crafted unit, tried it out through several iterations. And now we're entering a stage where it's a revision process, and that itself is sort of a piece of citizenship in the class, where each year the people who do choose to be instructors in this give us feedback on how it went, make suggestions within the scope that we hold. So we hold that the readings need to be something like less than 20 pages per class. There needs to be like credible, compelling tension between the readings where there's not an obvious right answer for the students. There's discussion questions that, we're facilitating students, not sort of demonstrating content, but their capacity to reason and grapple and struggle with each other. And then as we move through each teaching, we reevaluate the curriculum. We take every sincere piece of feedback seriously, and we have an oversight board of former instructors and current instructors and various interested people, and work and address each one, not quite like a paper review, but sort of almost. And then each summer, update the material. And so the hope is that if you're an instructor, and we're drawing from all over, we have this year, in addition to my own involvement, we have 2 CS professors teaching a session. We have had mathematicians, we've had neuroscientists, as well as people from core disciplines who sort of live in that space. And the hope is, and expectation is, that you stay in sync in terms, so your students are reading the same things as the rest of the students, that you use the same readings so you can supplement them. And then beyond that, there's really beautiful and sometimes amusing heterogeneity in how these people from these various disciplines choose to engage with those topics. And it's been a real joy to participate in.
Well, thank you. No problem. And Meg, if you'd like to share what's going on here at Ohio State.
Sure. So I'm Meg Daly. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education at Ohio State. My pronouns are she, her. And my portfolio of work as Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education is largely our brand new comprehensive Gen Ed, which we are rolling out. We're 1 semester in and nobody's died yet. As we say, this was a 6 years in the making revision of a 30-year-old curriculum. We went from each college having their own general education to a shared model for all students across all campuses and all majors. So we, in addition to our Columbus kind of flagship campus, we have regional campuses. The same curriculum and Gen Ed program is now used across all instantiations of the Ohio State University. And I could talk for a long time about how we got here, but what I really want to talk about today is how all of this has let us bring citizenship kind of into the foreground. So I'm going to share my screen and just go through a couple. Okay, so there we go. And I am fortunate to be here talking on behalf of myself and Alan, and also our colleague Cindy Jiang, who was scheduled to present and is really the expert on a lot of this content and the point of contact for this group for Ohio State. So I want to recognize Cindy and all the hard work she has done. So education for citizenship is the through line for general education at Ohio State for all students in all majors and all colleges. And this is what our Gen Ed program looks like. And we just in brief, what we have is a pair of seminars, well, one at the beginning called a launch seminar, one at the end called the reflection seminar, and then between it, an array of courses that cover the foundations of disciplines that are at the 1 and 2000 level, kind of freshman level courses, and then more advanced coursework in a set of pathways. All students take coursework in citizenship for a diverse and just world. And then students choose a theme or a pathway that's interesting to them, given their personal interests, their major, et cetera. And this shows you the breadth of those. So when I say that citizenship is a through line, I'm going to talk about how we connect with students on citizenship and civic learning in our bookends, our launch and reflection seminar, in the citizenship for a diverse and just world. But before I go and talk about those in depth, I want to point out this foundation in race, ethnicity, and gender diversity. As we were designing our GE curriculum, we considered this course an unofficial part of our citizenship curriculum. We didn't think that students would be able to grapple with citizenship and what it means and how it is experienced unless students had a common understanding of the ways in which race, ethnicity, gender diversity, and the intersection of those shape people's experience with one another and with states and their operations. So it's really in every piece of our gen ed, we have some component related to citizenship. So the big thing for us in developing this GE beyond the content and the ease with which our students would be able to navigate a shared program was that we would have goals and expected learning outcomes that were accessible and clearly linked to content and modifiable as our goals and our students' capabilities change over time. So this was a big motivation for us, and I think it's something that's common among research-focused institutions to want to have quantitative data about goals and expected learning outcomes, and to move those expected learning outcomes as our student profile changes. So one of the motivations for us in updating our GE was that in the 30 years since our last substantial revision, the demographics of Ohio State had changed dramatically from an open access to a selective access campus. Our research profile, the majors chosen by our students were just dramatically different. And so we wanted to be able to see and to tweak bits and pieces in a much more controlled way than we were able to do with the previous organization of our gen ed. So this is the goals. These are the goals of our gen ed program, and there's a lot of words here, and I'm just going to focus you in on this one of our 4 goals, which is explicit in expecting students to engage with global citizenship, that they will be interculturally competent global citizens who can engage with significant aspects of the human condition in local, state, national, and global settings. That's the goal. And then further on my right, as I'm looking at it, are the expected learning outcomes tied to those to that program goal. So why did we require citizenship? Now, this is a group where we don't really need to do a lot of convincing, but for us as an institution, it connected directly to our university mission of education for citizenship, which is part of our our motto and our seal, and is deeply embedded in the institution as part of its land grant mission. The citizenship theme builds from and adds depth to a race, gender, ethnic diversity foundation requirement. And the citizenship theme that is required addresses program goals in educated global citizenship and in an area that we call emotional, social, and professional abilities. We think of this education for citizenship in preparing students in their social and professional abilities, as I think my colleagues here have talked really convincingly about. So one of the things that's been great for us is that citizenship, we require it of all of our students, but as we have populated our gen ed with courses from all the academic units that care to contribute courses, so our GE model is existing courses get approved for different parts of the GE. We have essentially an unfettered access. So long as you meet the ELOs of that part of the GE, you are welcome to propose and offer a course in it. And so in citizenship, we have some of what I would say are the likely suspects. This is the brief description of a public affairs course, public service and civic engagement. This is, I think, the kind of course you might expect in citizenship. What's been so gratifying and in an intellectual way, but also organizationally, is that we've seen some really cool ways in which different disciplines are engaging with citizenship. So we have a communications class on media and citizenship, health and rehabilitation science class on ethical decision-making in healthcare that connects that to state, the state, national, local medical rules and the practice of medicine. With musical courses on musical citizenship offered by music. Psychology offers, they're so clever. You can tell that there's a strong, they have a strong understanding of what motivates people because they offer a gen ed course called A Practical Guide to Ruling the World. That's about political psychology and the ways in which that shapes our understanding of citizenship. So these are courses that span the curriculum and really allow students to take this lens of citizenship and think about it in all of these different ways. The other place where we're doing substantial engagement with citizenship are in our GE bookends. And these are mandatory small group seminars in year 1 and year 4 that help students develop and reflect on their academic goals. And they do this through mentored interaction with each other, with an e-portfolio, and with an instructor. And so this was an entirely new part of our GE, and I just want to highlight that this program, we touch about 7,500 students a year in this program. We just this week completed our first session, which taught about 2,500 students. These are students in sections of 19. So this is a huge logistics experience for us. But like Dan and Dusty explained for Stanford, this gives us a common intellectual experience for our students. We have a shared curriculum, and that small group setting, it's students aren't siloed by college, so that they're, the engineers are in classes with music students, with the business students. They're really having a interdisciplinary experience and getting to meet students outside of their own kind of program bubble. We offer this across all 5 of our campuses with this coordinated curriculum. And she's not here, but I'm going to offer her props anyway. We have an amazing program coordinator who makes this happen. So this would not be possible without that. But in this GE Bookends, we have 2 of our goals speak directly to citizenship. In our launch seminar, the first one, students begin to develop these critical skills and habits to navigate the academic environment, and we target them to consider the implication of information and technology use. And that's really about a foundational component of how we think about citizenship. How are you getting your information? How do you evaluate its credibility? That's foundational, the same way race, ethnicity, and gender diversity is to thinking about citizenship. We also task them to investigate a personal, societal, or global question, and to think about how disciplinary perspectives motivate that. And then in our closing reflection seminar, all 3 of the goals connect to citizenship, with some of the ELOs explicit on this. So they critically evaluate their experiences as engaged citizens and leaders. They reflect on their developing intercultural competency, and they evaluate their understanding and awareness of the global context, and they recognize opportunities to contribute to and shape the larger world. We haven't yet done this one yet. We just, as I said, we just closed the books on our first launch seminar. So maybe in 4 years, we'll be able to come back and provide some of the data. But we have an explicit assessment plan that goes with each of the pieces within the GE, so that we're able to see how students are experiencing this, and whether or not they're getting, or they're kind of picking up what we're laying down in terms of citizenship throughout our general education experience. That's me, Alan.
Thanks, Meg. So you can see several different models for how this works at different levels. I do urge you to ask questions, make comments, either in the chat or verbally in the room. I do have a couple questions to start us out. I wanted to ask Dustin about at SMU. You've decided to do this either with coursework or in other ways. Can you talk about some examples of how students have done the civics learning outside of classrooms, and why you decided to do it that way?
Yeah, similar to what Meg was sharing at Ohio State, when you look at our courses that are tagged with this graduation requirement about civics and individual ethics, you'll see a range of disciplines represented. So my colleagues in philosophy offer a course called The Good Life. Advertising offers courses like Advertising, Society, and Ethics. You see we have one called Mustang Emotional IQ, which looks at managing your emotions during conflict and how do you engage in healthy discourse when there might be conflict arising. So we have wonderful classes that meet this requirement. But as I mentioned, often there's a dynamic tension between the credit hours of general education, major related credit hours, and then the research focus of the institution. And so one of the things when we were reimagining our common curriculum, which we launched in 2020, is we needed to offer other types of pathways, and we needed to diversify the way our 6,800 undergraduate students were able to achieve this without adding much in terms of credit hours, because some of our STEM-related disciplines in engineering were pretty heavy or locked in, and there wasn't any way to add it outside of that. So it caused us to think creatively. And so those two other ways that I mentioned outside of courses is one of them is approved programs, clubs, or organizations. And so we've really seen this as a budding opportunity to collaborate with student affairs in some of our regular offerings. So for instance, we have an emerging leader program, which focuses on kind of the individual, society, and global groups, kind of what Dan mentioned is the Stanford motto with that 3-course sequence. And because it's a year-long program, that's an example of a way students reflect on and consider how they're making social change using the social change model, for instance. So that's one way students can achieve CIE through a program. Another example would be if they're an executive leadership within our student government. Our advisors will offer regular and periodic reflections about their work in what they're doing on campus and how they're benefiting the community or things larger than themselves, and way they can transfer that into society. So those are some examples of kind of clubs and recognized programs that our Council on General Education still approves those programs and groups. So there is a proposal process that they go through to be an approved activity. And then lastly are those individual pathways, which are done through petitions. Since we are a 6,800 smaller group of undergraduates compared to some of the state schools here, we do have a pre-approval and post-reflection process that students can follow on their own through these graduation requirements. And some of the examples that I've seen come through here recently for civics and individual ethics, our library coordinates our Constitution Day or helps with voter registration drives and often recruits students to help lead those initiatives. And those are examples of ways students do petitions to propose that experience. They're kind of supervised by someone on campus or in the community, and then are able to write a reflection, which you'll see linked on the website there, which kind of talks about how they're contributing to these aspects of freedom or justice, privacy, security, et cetera, those kind of general welfare and citizenship concepts that we're really targeting with this student learning outcome. So it's been a beautiful way of not really adding a ton of burden on the curriculum, but giving students alternative pathways and also incentives to getting involved in other aspects of student life on campus. And we found it really robust and meaningful with our work here.
What percentage of your students would you say do that individual process?
It's rather small right now. I'm thinking most recently, when you look at across all 7 of our proficiencies and experience, the average is about 12% across all of them. And I haven't broken that number out, but we are 2 years into it. And the other thing is, when we launched this, we were in the height of COVID. And so we are trying to get more proposals through for those approved programs and organizations. So my hope is to see that grow, Alan. But right now, that's kind of where we were sitting across all of 7 of our proficiencies and experience graduation requirements.
Thanks. Meg, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, so I love this aspect of your program, Dustin, and I may follow up by asking you some questions, but what I know that my colleagues would push back on is all of these experiences mean that the students aren't taking credit, right? They're not getting units that might get enrollment dollars associated with students taking courses are not seeing enrollment. And for us, given our budget model and the nature of the passing of the sort of the political landscape that we had to traverse to make the GE happen, even though the conceptual value of that is really clear and I can see how it benefits students and it offers flexibility, how does it intersect with credit, the sort of pressure to offer and enroll courses, especially in units like poli-sci and history and psychology that probably are seeing declining enrollments in light of AP and other kinds of dual credit programs?
That's a great question. With SMU, as you might imagine, being a private institution, being the dollar amount that we are related to our annual tuition rates, those were things that came into consideration. And a lot of, our marketing and targeting when we rolled out our new general education material, our general education curriculum, was to offer it's about 1 credit hour worth of work is what we associate a P&E to be versus, a course which might be 3 credit hours. And so when you're thinking about that, we actually invite or encourage different disciplines to actually not only tag a foundation or breadth, which is how we call our themes and foundation compared to Ohio, but also they could tag up another 1 or 2 graduation requirements. And so we actually see students are choosing courses based on what requirements that they're fulfilling. And so it behooves different disciplines and my colleagues to consider classes that are meeting these citizenship aspects with CIE. But to your point, we really value the outside of the classroom experience here at SMU. And because of that commitment to student leadership, student life, there is an appetite for this because we have a lot of our faculty who lean on their teaching elements and love to be advisors for student organizations and groups and are actually bringing this more into the co-curricular space, as well as our colleagues in student affairs. So I think it might be a culture thing, which is really leading this for us.
That's super inspiring. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Hi, so this question's for Meg, but maybe for all of you actually. Crystal from Montclair State University, we're in the process of sort of redoing our gen eds right now. And we're trying to implement a community engagement aspect into that. We've gotten a lot of pushback, which sounds a little bit like maybe what you were referencing, Meg. And so some of the questions I have is sort of who's evaluating. You gave a couple of examples of some really cool classes there that meet your requirements. Who's evaluating whether that meets a requirement or not? Is that just your regular curriculum committee? Or is it someone specifically from an engagement office? And are you providing rubrics or some other evaluative tool for course development across your university or college for courses to be developed that meet sort of those guidelines? And again, the second part of that, who is evaluating whether it's actually meeting those requirements or not? I know that's a lot of questions into one.
The short answer is Alan. So, so we do have rubrics. So we have a curriculum approval process that we inherited with our, that it came with our previous GE. And so we modified that. So for these themes that are inherently interdisciplinary, we have a very complicated sort of local process. It makes sense for us. And it engages faculty who are experts in this, in citizenship from all across campus. And they really focus on the content. Is this a citizenship class? Does it meet these kind of citizenship marks? We have another group that really is like nuts and bolts of course approval. So we have those work in tandem. That lets our faculty who have the content expertise not have to become experts on state rules for what is a credit hour and what is the correct statement, on student disabilities and all of the things that have to go on a syllabus for us. So we have a process that we modified. We have an oversight group, a university-wide oversight group that we developed as part of our GE revision process. And we agreed upon at the time of approval of our GE, we agreed upon assessment of courses and of the program. And that's led by Alan. That was why I said that's Alan. And we have a rubric that people include basically when they submit a course, how they think their course is meeting the elements in that rubric. So it is not a short process. It is super bureaucratic and not something beloved by the faculty, but I think it means that there is strong consensus that those courses are, there is the concern that people had about anything sort of anything goes has not materialized. And I guess I would just say this, for us, the citizenship impetus, it's certainly a university value and aligns with the kind of university vision. But this intercultural competence and race, ethnicity, and gender diversity so deeply embedded in it meant that it was also really a faculty value. So that piece was a huge sell to our faculty that we need to do better, that the scholarship our faculty is better reflected if we frame it that way. And so that piece of integrating it was very surprisingly easy to get faculty across campus to agree that this needed to go in, as the one piece that was required. And that there was consensus around what that meant. And I think we've been successful in showing people that their disciplines fit. And that, so but the bureaucracy is real. But we're a state, we're a giant state institution. We have bureaucracy for everything. So people kind of expect that. I suspect you're in the same place.
Yeah.
And I will say that that consensus was not quick. It was actually much easier than I thought it would be, but we spent a year and a half on listening tour, basically convening any group that would actually talk with us, the Gen Ed Review Committee, and said, what's working and what's not working? What would you hate it if we lost? And what do you really want to get rid of? And what would you like to see that we don't have now? And we also looked at all of the other institutions that we could find descriptions of. We looked at what AAC&U has published on it. And we did that listening. The three things that really bubble to the top were students don't know why they're doing this. We need to have some explicit work on why do you do this, which is like what Stanford's doing with the what is liberal education. So what we're doing in the launch seminar. We had to have something that was deeper. All of our classes were at that point introductory courses, and it was just a strict distribution model. And people said that's not enough anymore. We really need to do something at a higher level. So beyond the first year and cross-disciplinary, and that's with the themes. And we needed to have the citizenship and the diversity element there. And that's what came up from that. We designed something, we took it back out on another listening tour and got eggs thrown at us, but we revised it from there. So we did spend a lot of time building that consensus before we tried to get it through the governance process to get it approved. And I think that made a huge difference. Other questions or comments?
I guess I'll just add for state institutions, which among these is really only us, there's state bureaucracy to contend with. And the state was really enthusiastic about citizenship being in our GE and being so spotlighted. And actually, as a state kind of transfer coursework that's expected, now diversity is part of that. And that's in part because we're the 800-pound gorilla in the state higher ed ecosystem. And we were able to push that across at a state level in a way that our faculty were very gratified that they were able to have that leadership. And I think that has helped us with some of the kind of goodwill and challenges is for faculty to see the impact of their advocacy in the curriculum.
So Dustin, you've also said something about how you built the consensus there, but Dan, Dusty, would you like to share anything about how you built the consensus for your year-long program and how you get faculty at a school that's very often STEM focused to play in this playground?
Sure, maybe I'll take the first half of that question and give Dusty the second half. So we had a similar process. I mean, it helped that our president came in making undergraduate education one of his primary areas of concern, and he talked about having it be more purposeful. And we had heard from a lot of sources, including students, that they were, their only shared experience in the first year tended to be these big STEM classes. So the only thing they had in common were PSETs, and then, failing organic chemistry, which, isn't maybe the greatest foundation for 4 years of liberal education. So there was a sense that there was a problem. And then the president launched this thing called sort of the long range vision and just asked for people to send in ideas. And we got like 2,000 of them, many dealing with education. And we then there was a committee that sort of was supposed to look at these, put forward a proposals. And then like Megan, Alan, you were just describing, there was this very iterative process where we would try things out, have eggs thrown at us, make some revisions, talk to students, talk to faculty, and eventually, this is how we got it through the Senate. But I actually met Dusty on one of these talking tours when we came to the school of, then called the School of Earth, and got a lovely reception. So yeah, Dusty, what does it take to get STEM faculty on board?
I mean, yeah, I think it's been a real growth process and learning process. I mean, I think a lot of credit goes to Dan's leadership, both in like really reaching out and including and scaffolding my involvement and the involvement of other STEM faculty. I mean, we've had a group of, I don't know, maybe a half dozen of us who have taught the course now. And I think one of the things that seems true about the initial group is either were people like myself who went to a liberal arts college for undergrad, but then became science and engineering faculty, or are our close friends who we talked into doing it. And that was an interesting comparison to see folks who were, you know, bought in and enthused, but hadn't actually had terribly many courses that were discussion based. I was talking to another electrical engineering professor who's been a total leader on campus in the education space and for many years. And I was talking to him, and he had this comment where he said, like, I've never been in a course where there were readings. And I think that's an amazing, as we've worked together, and Dan being so generous and having, you know, scaffolding my leadership and participation in other folks, you know, that's a common and a mutual self-awareness with our you know, humanistic and social scientific colleagues to hear people say that. I think that led us in some ways, and some of the things that have worked really well in scaffolding STEM faculty who choose to teach in the course is to have this structure, is to have a default set of materials, and we have what's called faculty college, where the summer before you can actually take the course sort of with each other before you teach it. And I think the experience for our STEM faculty to gain that comfort, we have these weekly Zoom calls when the course is being taught with other instructors, talking about how last week went, what you're planning to do. You can ask other people what they're planning to do. And so far, because it's still relatively young, whoever sort of lovingly created each unit is usually either there or accessible. So that, I think, has been super rich. I think on the flip side, folks for whom this is their core competency, the mental model we're sharing of what a student who's entering the course would come equipped by has been a massive gap and been something we've had to work on hard together. And I think has made the course way more accessible and rich for our students. So for example, some of my colleagues, you know, come in and in their area of scholarship are eager to just problematize things right away. And that's fair. Like, if my own area of scholarship was a core requirement, I study, you know, radar. And if all first year students had to study radar, I would have a totally interesting, nuanced, provocative way to introduce that to every single student, but that's not what we're doing. And so to have some of us there who share the starting points of our students and to remind our colleagues that you need to establish something before you problematize it, I think has led us to move the order and move the character of the curriculum in a way that as our students move through it, it fits them better. I think it also sends a really important signal to those students that our science and engineering faculty are choosing at a place where we have a lot of agency over what we teach to teach this. I think it also, as we shape what the course is about, you know, forces us, if we think every student can engage with this, we certainly should be able to have every faculty member on campus, if they want to, capable of facilitating and teaching that. And I think it also moves the content into a space that's close to its intention. So it's a lot of work, but I think it's very generative work.
Thank you. Paul, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I am with the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. And Alan and Meg, I work pretty closely with your colleagues at the John Glenn School on a collaboration on 21st century democracy. And one of the things that we're looking at is developing a potential core course across the universities. But before we do that, we're also looking at what we can do at Maryland and contribute to the conversations. And the question I have is, as a flagship public university, did you consider what your P through 12 curriculum is around civics? And is it in any way a continuation of that? And also, did you work on this in terms of trying to develop something that could be disseminated throughout your university system. I don't know how your governance works in Ohio, but we're part of a university system, and we've had discussions with that network of schools through their leadership to see if there's things that we can learn from them, and wondering just in terms of networking both before and within the other university systems, how you came to incorporate that into what you ended up with eventually.
Alan, you want to take the ELO question?
So as part of the development process, once we had come up with that lovely structure that Meg showed you the chart of, we decided that we needed to have shared goals and expected learning outcomes for the general education as an overall program, and then for each element of it. And there was a committee that I co-chaired of faculty, staff, students from across all of the university, and we looked at each of the elements. So we looked at writing and information literacy. What does it mean when we say you have gotten what you need to from the general education for writing and information literacy? What does it mean when you've taken your natural science requirement? And that, again, very iterative. And then we took them out, got the people who were the content experts to tell us what should be there, but then got people who were not at all content experts to tell us how we should say it so that the students would understand what we were saying. Because the curse of expertise is we can say something and know exactly what we mean, and our students will never know that until they become experts as well. So we worked on that for a long time. One thing we discovered as we were building the race, gender, and race, ethnic, and gender diversity course was that we didn't have something to start with there, because that had not been a standalone course requirement. It had been an add-on in the past. So that we were building up from scratch. And we were doing that in collaboration with our State Board of Regents, because we have to, in Ohio, we don't have a university system in that there are all the universities are part of the same structure. Ohio State has 5 other campuses, but that's all Ohio State. The University of Cincinnati is a completely different university, and they have their control, but we both are funded through and have some oversight by the State Board of Regents, who demand that we have transfer of the generic general education requirement. And so at the same time we were designing this, we were in negotiations to change that so that it matched our new gen ed and Cincinnati's new gen ed and Ohio University's new gen ed, so that we weren't all pulling in lots of different directions. One thing we did discover in the foundational level is we put in one learning outcome that's across all of them, and that is that students need to be aware of and be able to describe the social and ethical impacts of that content area. And this is Ron, who is my Zoom coworker that Meg was telling some of you about earlier. So he decided to show up. So Meg, if you want to take on the articulation.
Sure. I mean, I think that the piece with having it be part of, our race, ethnicity, and gender diversity, kind of pushing the state to adopt a similar piece, was a feel-good story. And I mean, maybe something not explicit in your question, but very relevant for us, is the sensitivity on state schools around anything that uses the word race and diversity in a very public, visible way. The fact that we and the the Ohio Department of Higher Education, which is the coordinating body that Alan was talking about, all adopted this at the same time. We also had some feedback from employers about the importance of students being able to work across difference and navigate a more complex and diverse world. That actually provided us with wonderful ammunition for having those conversations with constituencies that might be a little bit more concerned about what is the content of how are we teaching citizenship, how are we teaching race, ethnicity, gender diversity, and so it has been remarkably smooth, and those pieces have articulated well. Citizenship is not actually part of the ODHE approved curriculum, so that kind of transfer module of courses. Citizenship is not an expected outcome, but there are social science. There are places where whatever our students are taking in citizenship can articulate, because it's either a social science or an arts or a humanities approach, regardless of whether it's offered through social work or through sociology. So we have a way for that to articulate for students who leave us to go somewhere else, and we have a way to contextualize what students who transfer in might have taken in that way. But for us, the hot buttonness of citizenship and race was really diffused by broad value of this across the higher ed landscape and from our business community. And I have to say, our board of trustees love that citizenship is part of it explicitly. So it has been less contentious than we feared. Cindy, is there anything you want to add, since we're fortunate enough to have you join us now?
Sorry, I'm joining the game very late, so I'm listening to the conversations and learning more from the other colleagues representing different campuses here. So glad to be here, and my apologies.
If I could just, I just wanted to pick up on a theme that I think is really interesting across all of these stories, which is being able to appeal to your institutional history. So Ohio has this great Latin motto, Disciplina in Civitatem, which could translate as education and citizenship. In our case, it proved really helpful to be able to go back to our founding grant and point out this is where we're actually saying the purpose of the university is to promote the public welfare, and all of this language that's actually lifted straight from the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And whenever and I think a lot of especially state institutions at some level there, you can find that language, at various places in your history. And if this is something you're trying to do, it's just so great to have that leverage and to be able to point back and say things like, I think Dusty said, or maybe it was in another meeting, citizenship is in our DNA. And it's a bit of a rhetorical move, but I think it often is true that we as institutions, we have kind of veered away from many of the founding principles that were present when we were founded. So
it's a really useful reframe for some of the discussions. Like, this has long been important to us. I think it's really helpful.
As somebody once said, the motto, the unofficial motto of most universities is never do anything for the first time. So being able to say, no, this isn't new. We've always been doing this. You just haven't been noticing.
I think we have time for either one last question or a wrapping up remark. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask or share? Go ahead, Dustin.
I guess I'll share that. I mean, one of the things that probably I suspect is true across the board, but certainly has been true in teaching this, is that our students had a real hunger for a space in which they could express their opinions and feel that their professors and their colleagues were taking what they said charitably, and could practice talking in a way that was sincere and convicted and about important things, but in a space where they were encouraged to disagree and think and grapple together. And I think this topic lends itself to being a place for that, and to practice those patterns of interactions with each other that are needed and valuable across the curriculum and across the campus. And I think it's also, useful for our faculty to practice that too. So I think that's been a knock-on benefit that has seemed very rich and well received by everyone who participated.
Mm-hmm. I want to echo that Ellen and Meg just explained at the policy level, at the larger statewide level, whether the including diversity and race, gender, ethnicity has not become contentious, but I'm on the ground teaching these courses, and I would agree that our students have been really embracing the citizenship theme and the way we are reframing diversity as essential part of the society we live in, and the fact that we are actually talking about this at the general education level, they really welcome that and able to connect the dots. How does this connect to my major or the kind of career that I want to pursue? So that's been really wonderful to see, and in that way, that the way we are approaching diversity, even social justice and equity issues, really, very broad, embracing that citizenship and the diversity within the society. So in that way, it has been very welcoming topic for students, and gave them that tool to expand or go into other foundational classes or even the citizenship sim classes to dive deeper into these issues. So.
Great. I do want to, follow up on that. I know that Cindy's been teaching a couple of the launch seminar sections this fall, and I've been hearing from some of the other instructors that at the beginning, students were really skeptical about what this class was, about why they had this new requirement, because it's brand new this semester. No one else has ever taken it before. And that has changed over the course of the last 14 weeks. Students really are now starting to tell us how much they've appreciated that space that you were talking about, Dusty, of a place where they can actually talk about things that matter to them, and that they're invited and encouraged to do that in ways that they may never have, no one may ever seen before. So that's been a really exciting thing to see at a place this big.
Thank you all for such thoughtful questions and for the opportunity to do exactly what we just described for our students, to think and talk and share on this. I really appreciate it. And we shared out the PowerPoint, and it's got contact information for us on it. And I encourage you, if you have follow-up questions, to reach out. It's great to meet you.
The links to all three of the programs have been in the chat. If you came in later than that, I think Shalon is going to be sharing those back to the conference organizers, and you'll be able to find them on the conference platform. So thank you all very much for being here with us this afternoon, and we'll see you again in another meeting.
Thank you.